It's Frostgrave week and we have 3 amazing bundles to give away. We'll be choosing winners from the comments on 3 of our communities. 1 from the comments on YouTube, 1 from the comments from OnTableTop.com, and from the Cult of Games members' comments, so you guys get an extra chance to win. Drop those comments in, and we hope you enjoy the week.
Hello folks, today I am joined once again by Benjamin, and with us is Joe McCullough, award-winning author of Frostgrave, and we're here to talk about expanding on Frostgrave through the additional scenario books that are available. So, pleasure to have you here, Joe.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
And I think the first thing to say is there is a wealth of scenarios in the main book already.
Yes.
You start with 20.
Yeah.
But I think this really hits home the fact that it is a narrative adventure for the players, that they aren't just playing a kill scenario every time they set out. So when you come to actually work on a new supplement or expansion for Frostgrave, what are the sort of things you're looking to do with it?
It depends. I pick a central theme generally to each expansion, and that can be a narrative. So like with All Village Lord of the Red King, that's kind of a big story that we're going to tell through these scenarios, and then write those scenarios and kind of whatever rules I think would go along well with that. Or I can take kind of a mechanical approach, kind of take one aspect of the game. So like I wrote a supplement called Forgotten Pacts, which is all about demons. So it expands the rules for demons and then gives scenarios to go along with those expanded rules, or even kind of presenting different ways to play the game. So with Into the Breeding Pits, it's a book about playing games underground and, kind of more dungeony type, or Perilous Dark, which is all about playing the game solo or cooperatively, techniques and scenarios for doing that. So so kind of picking that one core thing and then seeing where the imagination goes within that limitation is generally how I do it.
And the new book that's coming out is The Red King, which really leans into the you say you have introduced demons and demonic entities before, but this takes it to a whole new level.
Yes. Yeah, so Frostgrave has this idea that it's only kind of one reality amongst many, and in the main game that only really comes into play in the sense that demons are entities from other realities that are drawn to the reality of Frostgrave. So you don't really see those other realities so much as little bits of them occasionally show up and try to kill you. But with Red King, I wanted to see if I could really take that idea that's always existed in the game and see kind of how far I could push it. So the central theme of the Red King is basically an attempt by one of those realities, the reality of the Red King, to literally take over Frostgrave by sitting on top of it, essentially, by kind of merging its reality with that of Frostgrave, and seeing how I could take that idea, which is this kind of really high metaphysical idea, but filter that down. So how does that play out on a tabletop? While it's a high concept idea, we still need very specific rules for how we can do that in a scenario. But I wanted to see, having written a lot of scenarios now, I'm always looking to see how I can press game design and my game design in new directions. And so with this supplement, I wanted to see how much can I manipulate the table upon which we're playing a scenario while we play it. How much can I change the rules of reality that we're playing on? And that sounds, again, whoa, really out there, but generally involves a piece of string when you actually get it onto the table.
Yeah.
So
I was going to say, what are the core components that is listed in the start of the book is get yourself a ball of string. And I was like, this is interesting. Yeah.
Ball of string and a deck of cards and away you go.
Exactly. So, I mean, yeah, once I'd kind of gotten this idea of string, because I used it for one little thing, and then I realized, well, actually, you can start using this string in lots of different ways to kind of cut the board in half or divide the board in other ways so that the rules that apply here don't apply to there, or the way I move from here no longer is the normal way I would move from there. And so I just started to really have fun with how many different rules things can I do with this piece of string, and how can I relate that to the idea of another reality trying to take over this one. Which again, I don't want to scare people too much in that, the game is totally out there, which, conceptually I want it to be because that's the theme. But when you're actually playing on the game, it is like, this is the break for the rules. So
one of the things that, like, we talked about it a little bit in our sort of introduction to Frostgrave, but the game can be played in many different ways. You got like solo, co-op, etc. But the thing that comes through very much, I found when reading through the Red King, was this idea of you're still technically fighting against each other to try and steal all these treasures, but there's also the ever-present threat of the Red King in the background and his demon army and all that kind of thing. And so maybe you do have to work together now to try and do something about this. I really like that sort of drip fed into the story, and then it gets a lot more serious as things go on.
Yeah, that's the kind of, because it's very hard to build a narrative in which two groups are always fighting. Like this kind of idea of why do we always end up in the same place at the same time? And luckily most wargamers don't worry about that too much. But this one actually gives that reason because, at first you're just kind of going along and noticing, gosh, a lot of weird things are starting to happen around, even weirder than normal around Frostgrave. And then as it goes on, there becomes a physical reason why you're all being kind of driven together. And the enemies get bigger and bigger so you start thinking a bit more about, is this treasure really what's important versus, stopping the apocalypse?
Yes. Yes is always the answer to that question.
that tends to be the
apocalypse
the
is
war game answer. Exactly. 200 gold. Yeah, that's forever.
That is forever, yeah. Well, certainly for the rest of your life, however short that may be.
Exactly.
This is the Red King is very much a story-driven I suppose a mini campaign or a chapter within the Frostgrave world. So there is a ramp up of things happening in it, where you get progressively more and more involved in the story and find out more of what is happening to the city as you play through. So you've done some of these before. Are these approached in a different way, where you're trying to make a linked campaign or linked narrative within the book to actually writing? Do you take a different approach when you want this to be the main theme, or do you think of, here's my story, now within that story what could be key sort of trigger points, and then sort of fill in the scenarios afterwards that would fit within that?
Yeah, so when I came to write this one, it was more like I sketched out, this is what the kind of whole narrative is going to look like. And now how can I break that up into kind of 10 chapters where each chapter is a scenario, and how can they drive from one to the other? Whereas like Forgotten Pacts, where I first did demons, it was more like, now I've got all these demon toys, let's put them into a scenario. Maybe we'll connect a few of those scenarios, but that's kind of lesser import than just giving you the chance to play with these new toys. Where this one's much more, you are in the story. So
and it's even played out. It's played out like a book or like a play, where you have very defined acts, and within those acts, then there are specific scenarios that complete those to sort of lead people along. So you have this very, I want to say, concise narrative that's building. The problem some people find when they play through sort of complicated narratives like this is, if you fail on a scenario, does that then impede progress into the next scenario? Does that, is it a speed bump in the road, or have you taken those things into account, the pitfalls of constantly rolling badly on that massive D20.
Right. In some ways, you can't fail this until the very end, because you basically don't have that choice. There's no way to, like, once you cross a certain point during the campaign, there's no way to escape. You're going along to the end, no matter how good or bad it goes. Whereas, and then that is unusual. Every other one, kind of, I've written more or less you could bail out if you want to do it again. Well, that's somebody else's problem. But this one, you have to be there until the end.
The string is coming.
Exactly. You can't just kind of grab your treasure and run. But when you get to that last scenario, it's pretty much do or die. But at the same point, if you're the kind of player that's only going to meet up once a month to play with somebody, you don't have to play the whole thing as this huge overarching campaign. Each scenario, more or less, there's one or two that are very directly linked, but most of them you could just play as kind of one-off weird event scenarios, and in that way would fit back into most of what's gone before in Frostgrave.
One of the things that's also included in the book, in addition to all the scenarios and the additional and all the bits and pieces you've thrown in there to sort of support those, is that you've got like a fairly extensive edition of more magical items and all sorts of things in there as well. So did you have a lot of fun making up new and interesting pieces that you could throw at the players and stuff and their warbands?
Yeah, I think it becomes addictive once you start like creating magic items, especially if you're doing it partly for a living. It just becomes like little packets of creativity I can throw out there. And one of the challenges with that actually is because when you get right down to it, most magic items are ways to bend your rules. Essentially, they're modifications of the core rules of the game. But as we discussed when we first did a Frostgrave thing, Frostgrave doesn't have a huge number of rules. So as I've gone on, it's become a little bit tougher and tougher because, like, man, I've already bent that rule numerous times, all out of shape. What can I do now? But yeah, so with this one, I did artifacts, which is kind of a new level of magic items, and which gave me some kind of more room to play. So they're slightly more powerful, but they all also come with some sort of disadvantage as well. So they're kind of, the great cursed item that people can play with. And
I was going to say, you've got to straddle the line of either being like Celebrimbor or more like Sauron, perhaps, when it comes to forging your magic items for players, I guess.
Exactly.
Depends how terrible you are as well, I suppose. I remember, and I will digress very briefly here, but I remember decades ago playing a fantasy RPG, and one of the players, he was like an artifact hound. He could sniff them out in any dungeon and would put everybody else in peril to get his hands on them. And so the GM bestowed on him the Sword of Incineration. And the first time he used it in a fight, the blade incinerated him, and he was just left holding the hilt. I was just like, unlucky, Richard. Sometimes, there you go. Sometimes artifacts can cut two ways. But you were saying that you've introduced new artifacts, but there aren't a huge amount of rules within Frostgrave that you can tweak or you can change. So with the Red King, there is, I suppose, a new additional rules with the cracking of reality that you've added in to change up how the game plays and to also affect the storyline as well. So can you tell us a bit about the cracking of reality as the Red King's realm merges, I suppose?
Yeah, so I mean, originally, I sat down and I planned out that big story, and I realized in each story you're going to have kind of this. In the beginning, you're just going to have these little kind of clues as a weird thing happened, and as it goes on, these weirdnesses, these cracks get bigger and bigger. And then I realized, not only do I have so many ideas that I can't actually use them all in the scenarios I've got, but also why limit them to just the scenarios you've got? So I did a section on reality cracks, which is basically a big table, or a couple of tables that you can roll on to see A, if it happens during the scenario you're playing, and B, what happens if it happens. And yeah, they're all just kind of oddities in reality. Somehow the rules change in the middle of play. And Yeah, and you can either use those in your Red King games, at least in the early ones, if you want. You probably don't want to use them in the later ones that are starting to get pretty complicated on their own. But it's also just an aid to, we just kind of want to play a normal game of Frostgrave, but we want a chance of some greater weirdness in it. You can go to this table and roll some stuff up and find that giant hoof descending from the heavens and just refreshing things.
Yeah.
So
I like it where you get things like, for a moment, the world goes wobbly. Like reality has been seen through a cloud of gas fumes, and then people begin to switch locations.
Yeah.
And then that's something where, because you do that bit in secret, if you're playing a 2v, 1v1 or whatever adversarially, if you're playing versus, your opponent doesn't know what way your warband's going to be revealed, and if you're playing cooperatively, then maybe you've a bit of back and forth as you try and work out the best way to do it, which is interesting. And like you say, the fact that it's a very simple set of rules, comparatively speaking, because you just need your bit of string and then your table to roll on. Depending on how many players you've got, that table can change as well, because they come thick and fast if lots of people are rolling dice every turn. But I like the idea of, as a larger narrative, taking this mechanic, and possibly if you are playing earlier games or earlier scenarios and then running through some of those, that you can occasionally crack reality, especially if you've got a GM running the games, then occasionally these things happen, and maybe you don't tell the players why something has happened. If you're GMing it, they could be playing through ulterior motives. Is a lovely little quest deck. I love it to bits. Or Perilous Dark with the Thaw of the Lich Lord, and they could be playing any of those. And then maybe when that roll comes up, then discreetly the GM can roll on the table and do this. And then over time, when they're playing through, they become more and more prevalent and lead to the build-up to actually reaching the Red King scenario, so that rather than starting straight off the back and people go, well, it's demons, I know it's about demons are coming. These little hints, these little things can start creeping into earlier games just to change things up a bit. And I think there's already a wealth out there of scenarios that you've published, that people shouldn't just look at this as the second edition scenario book. The Red King is not the be all and end all. That all of the existing books that are on the market that have been printed, some as long as 5 years ago now. Yeah, they're all still perfectly valid, because Frostgrave has never changed mechanically. So you can bring all of those through, and if people are just getting into Frostgrave, then yes, by all means, Red King, jump on board that, because there's a lot of fun in there. But there's a wealth of booklets and folios and compilations already available out there. Do you have any particular favorites amongst what you've already worked on? Things that you go back to? Or is that like asking you to pick your favorite child?
Nah, I do that all the time. But changes from day to day. But one of my favorites is one of the ones you just mentioned, is Ulterior Motives, because I think that was something that I'd never seen before, really, in miniatures gaming, and it's something that changed significantly halfway through. So I told Osprey I want to do a book that's about kind of subquests during games, because as Frostgrave is, you've either got, we're trying to get treasure, or we've got whatever the scenario specifically tells us we're doing, which is fine most of the time, but occasionally it's kind of like, shouldn't our wizards be doing different things? We've gone into this city, what is it specifically we're doing? So in Ulterior Motives, you're actually given a card that says, actually, you're trying to do this. You want to get the treasure too, but you'd actually like to try to accomplish this as well. And most of those are secret. You don't show them to your opponent. And so your opponent's not quite sure what you're up to, and you're not quite sure what he's up to. And one of the fun things about, like I said, I started that out as a book, and I realized, man, there's not a good way to accomplish this as a book, especially because I wanted you to be able to keep them secret. But keeping secrets in war games is a kind of dicey area, because you gotta have some way to prove what you said. But I realized, actually, if we switch this to cards, I can give you a card and you can reveal that card at a certain point so that you prove this is what I'm trying to do. This is the card I was given. And it just works out better. But I think but it really is a way to take kind of any Frostgrave game I'm playing and bring a new element to it and really keep it fresh, but also bring in strongly that element of narrative, because now, instead of just getting treasure, actually I'm looking for one specific tomb because I've heard it's got X in it and I really want X. So that's long been one of my favorites. I also quite like Perilous Dark a lot for a couple of reasons. One, it's a game about solo wargaming and cooperative wargaming, which is a pretty new concept, at least in the world of kind of published wargaming. It's not something that's got a lot of coverage, and it's something that obviously proved to be a big boon for people in this year. So it's good that it kind of came out last year and it's there. But also, it's unlike a lot of the other Frostgrave books I've written, it's got a lot of kind of my personal philosophy of wargaming in it. So Perilous Dark kind of goes through different techniques I suggest you use for solo or cooperative gaming. So we kind of break it down into almost like lessons, like here's how I would set up my most basic solo game. I would use these techniques. Mm-hmm. Here's some examples. Here's a couple of scenarios. All right, now that we've done that, let's go to the next level. And I would add this on, and here's some more scenarios and some tables and on and on. And so that one was a lot of fun to write. At first, I was a little bit worried, like, are people going to want to read this? Haven't they just thought about this themselves? But, sometimes I forget that people like me and you, we think about wargamings for a living. And while that's wonderful, it allows us to go deeper and in more depth than a lot of people can have if it's just their hobby. So it's nice to be able to kind of show people, hey, here's what I've thought about because I've spent a lot of time on it. And this might be something you can use for your games. And a lot of it doesn't even have to apply to Frostgrave. It really works for kind of any skirmish level warband games. These are techniques you could use to make it solo. Yeah. So
it's definitely like it's definitely something that we've talked about previously when we mentioned Frostgrave in the sort of introduction to this. But I like that everything that's come out for it has that kind of toolbox element to it. And it's all kind of interesting individual lessons that can come together to form large campaigns, as obviously with like the Red King and all the other ones. But you could also just pick and choose the bits you like and build that into your version of Frostgrave, which is cool. And the fact that it all carried over from the first edition to the second means that there's just this wealth of content to play around with now. So.
Yeah, I've always tried to keep each book independent in the sense that you don't need to own any of the other books. Each one has elements that you can or cannot add to your game. So like I said, if you want to do Underground, you probably want to go get into the breeding pits, but if it doesn't interest you, try something else, and don't feel like, oh my God, I'm missing an important element of the game. You're not, there's going to be some monsters and soldiers in there that you don't have, but these are not, you're not going to show up at a game and go, what, you're capable of doing that? There's special rules allow you to do it. It's not going to be a big deal. So.
One of the talking of sort of like something that I take from an expansion and move into something else is the Ragged Warband stuff that you have in the Red King, which I just think is a really nice way of kind of playing around with what wizards have to deal with. Like, you can't count on the same people turning up to help you. Now you have random people joining your warband that you just need now. And I love that kind of having to play a game within a game. Almost a little bit like we were talking about with ulterior motives kind of thing, where you're like, okay, so I've got a different mission that I've got to do, but I've also got all these guys that have turned up to help. And I just think that's a fascinating concept to use across the board in Frostgrave, beyond just what you do in Red King.
Yeah, that idea, I think, it probably goes back to the original Realms of Chaos book, the big orange one that is one of my just favorite gaming products of all time, because it's just a big book of random tables. And you roll this warband, and like, as a gaming tool, it makes no sense because it's so easy for one guy to end up with this kind of like uber warband, and this other guy to end up with just complete junk. But it's so much fun to construct it and to roll all your mutations and stuff. So I had this idea, like, I'm going to do that for Frostgrave. And I started to work on it a little bit. And then I realized, wait a minute, this has the same problem of like, I've got everything and you've got nothing. Who really wants to play that, you know?
Yeah.
But then I thought, okay, well, I can bring an element of that into it because the soldiers aren't hugely varied. You know, obviously knights are better than bucks, but you're not going to cripple the game by just determining randomly who's in your warband. So I kind of set that up, and then I realized as I was working on the Red King, I've actually got the perfect situation here that the wizards are cut off from where they would normally recruit people. So yeah, they got to take what they can get, you know, if they're replacing losses. So yeah, that table's in there specifically to go with the Red King, but also if you just want to roll random warbands, it's there and you can use it. So give it a shot.
I think that's randomness is always fantastic.
Exactly.
If I ever get the chance to pick or roll randomly, it's roll randomly every time.
Exactly.
Always to my own detriment in the long run, I feel. C'est la vie. Well, it's been terrific talking to you, Joe.
Yeah, it's been great.
About the expansions and about where you can take Frostgrave. If people want to know more, you also have a blog spot where you are constantly posting the stuff you're working on and things you're doing. So that's the Renaissance Troll, if memory serves.
That is correct.
And what sort of stuff do you post on that? Is it anything and everything, or?
Yeah, it literally started as just my hobby blog. This is where I put my painted miniatures. And because I started it before I was a word games writer, and so slowly over the years it's modified, and I still do that. I still post a lot of miniatures that I paint, but I also kind of post announcements about, you know, what's coming out or what I'm working on, and occasionally I'll I'll buy a miniature that has no rules in anything I've ever done, so I'll just create some rules for it for Frostgrave. Yeah. Here you go. You know, I really want to play with one of these, and if you do too, here you go. So it's a lot of fun.
And that way, the game world develops.
Exactly.
shiny model syndrome, I think is how it's called. Exactly. Well, folks, if you're interested in getting involved in the wider world of Frostgrave, definitely check out Joe's blog. We'll pop a link for it down below. If you've any questions about the Red King or the expansions or anything else we're doing for Frostgrave, then by all means ask us below and we will do our best to get them answered. Until then, bye-bye.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.